It actually was an odd decision. What happened is that I had a boyfriend who was at Cornell a year ahead of me, so it was the only school I wanted to go. And then we broke up, and I realized I want to go to another school. And a friend of mine knew somebody who had gone to Colby and loved it. So I had applied there just sort of thinking, well, if anything happens to this relationship. Anyway, I'm so glad I ended up there. It was the best liberal arts education. My teachers there were better than any I ever had at Harvard later in graduate school. Some of them made you think if you could just understand everything about Plato and Aristotle, you'd know truth and justice. And I loved the place, much as this. I had a boyfriend here for a little while, so I was at Bowdoin as well, every now and then.
When you were at Colby, did you know that you wanted to be a professional historian?
I don't think so. I think I loved history, and I had not only loved history from the time I was little, with my father teaching me how to keep score when I was 6 years old so I could recreate the games for him of the Brooklyn Dodger game, but then I had a history teacher in high school who won an award as the best history teacher in all of New York State, and then I had great history and government teachers at Colby. And so I knew that I just somehow wanted to do something with that subject, and at that time, for most young women, going to graduate school seemed the easiest and the most acceptable thing to do. I probably think if I'd graduated 10 years later, maybe I would have thought about law school, but I'm so happy that it went this way.
I was thinking about the arc of the books you've written and about the extraordinary opportunity you had with your first book, which was about Lyndon Johnson, and you had spent so much time with Lyndon Johnson and got to know him so well. Did that sort of spoil you because you had such an up-close view of this monumental figure in American history? When it came time in later years to write about people who were long dead, did you kind of find yourself saying, gee, I wish I could go back to what I had the first time around?
Well, you know, there's no question, I think, that experience with Lyndon Johnson, who I knew mostly in the last years of his life, so he was so sad and vulnerable then, feeling like the war in Vietnam had cut his incredible domestic legacy in two, that he opened up to me in ways he never would have if I'd known him at the height of his power, sharing his fears and his sorrows and great stories. And I realized, I think, even right after that, what a privilege it was to have spent so much time with him. It made me look empathetically at my subjects from then on to try and understand them from the inside out. And I do think it was scary afterwards, because I knew this guy. I was never going to know the other guys. But the interesting thing is, the further you go back in time, the more, as an historian, you have access to letters and diaries. And there's nothing more treasuring for an historian than to read a letter that your subject has written when he was a young man, or to a girlfriend or a wife. You feel like you're looking over their shoulders. It's as good or even better, perhaps, than a conversation. And diaries are fantastic. So as it got scary to go back to FDR or to Lincoln, the sources were richer than they would be nowadays, when 200 years from now, people will know so much about us, but they won't have those intimate sources that we had back in that earlier time.
For people who aren't familiar with the story, how did you get so close to Lyndon Johnson? How did that door open?
It's a very curious way it opened. I was selected as a White House Fellow, a fabulous program, when I was a graduate student at Harvard. Colin Powell was a White House Fellow, Wesley Clark. You go down and work for a cabinet officer or a White House for a year, and then go back to whatever you were doing. And so we had a big dance at the White House the night we were selected. Johnson did dance with me, not that peculiar. There were only 3 women out of the 16 White House Fellows, but he whispered to me that he wanted me to be assigned directly to him in the White House. But it was not to be that simple. For in the months leading up to my selection, like many young people, I was active in the anti-Vietnam War movement, and had written an article against LBJ, which unfortunately came out in the New Republic several days after the dance in the White House, and the title was How to Remove Lyndon Johnson from Power. So I was sure he would kick me out of the entire program, but instead, surprisingly, he said, oh, bring her down here for a year, and if I can't win her over, no one can. So it started in that bizarre way. It made him interested in trying to figure out if he could indeed talk to me. I ended up working for him in the White House, and then going to his ranch those last years to help him on his memoirs part-time. It was the most amazing experience.
And you became a confidant of his, despite your difference in ages, backgrounds, and so forth. What was the line he said that you reminded him more of his mother than any woman he had ever met?
It was really a weird comment, because I was afraid sometimes I was a young woman, and he had somewhat of a minor league womanizing reputation. But everything was great. We were friends, and everything seemed on the up and up. And then until one day he said he wanted to discuss our relationship. and he took me to the lake, conveniently called Lake Lyndon Johnson, and there was wine and cheese and a red check tablecloth, all the romantic trappings, and he started out, "Doris, more than any other woman I've ever known," and my heart sank, thinking, oh my God, here it comes. And then he said, "You remind me of my mother," which was bizarre. I mean, I've seen pictures of her. She was tall, she was big. I mean, there's no connection. It's an odd line. Well, the filming is all done. They did a lot of it in Richmond.